secondary competition for that wild card spot. So Pittsburgh, if they don't win in that AFC North, it's a tough league because if you don't make the wild card, what's the point of finishing 7th in the conference? What's the point of finishing 8th when you've just given up a first round pick? I think it's a big risk here they're taking.
Totally agree. I even think if they are just patient, they come out in week 3 and they're at the 49ers. That's not a juggernaut. That's a winnable game. Then they have the Bengals. So if they at least assess at that point, say they get 2 wins and they're 2-2, then I think you could start to be aggressive before you go into week 5. And then you have Ravens, Chargers, and then you get a break with the Dolphins again. So I think if they would have just been patient, but if they lose the next 2 and they're 0-4, what's the point of giving your first round pick away for a player that's not helping you? And even a team like, for example, Denver is 0-2. They had the whole issue where they were trying to trade Chris Harris Jr. in the offseason. They couldn't get a decent deal for him. They end up sweetening his deal this year, but he's going to be a free agent next year. So even if you get 2-2, maybe you call Denver, who is more than likely going to be 0-4 or at least 1-3, and you offer them a 3rd and a 5th for Chris Harris Jr. I think they probably would take that deal if they know they're going to lose him. And then you save your first round pick. You can still be good now, and you have a chance next year as also kind of a pull the ripcord if things don't go well this year. Instead, they just blew it all up and almost like a panic move. I just completely disagreed with that move just based on what we know about this team right now. And it's the fact that they're 0-2 and they're already climbing uphill with a quarterback who's completely unproven. Eric, another team with a quarterback who at least we thought might be a little bit more proven, but he didn't look that way on Sunday. That would be Teddy Bridgewater. The Saints went into LA to play the Rams. It was that much hyped game. All the Saints are going to come back. They want to get their revenge. I don't know how you get revenge in week 2 for a trip to the Super Bowl that the refs cost. I don't know what the Rams did at that point. But regardless, the Saints went into that game. Not only, Eric, did they not get closure, the wound got open more. Oh, and they lost Drew Brees for 6 weeks as once again, the referees found a way to absolutely screw the Saints. This time they absolutely killed any momentum the Saints had, pretty much ended their chances in that game. So, Eric, before we get to the Saints outlook with Drew Brees, is this now just 3 straight games with unfortunate issues with the refs that have affected the Saints negatively, or is there something here to all these screw-ups that we're missing?
I'd like to think there's nothing to this. These NFL refs, they have real jobs that they do outside of this. I don't think they come to this stadium saying, yeah, I'm going to find another way to screw Sean Payton and the Saints today. I just don't think that's a reality, but you can see it that they are making huge mistakes. And Sean Payton says, I'm tired of always being on the wrong end of these mistakes. And he has a point. It's happening in big moments. It's happening in big games, and it's costing them dearly. So I think they have every right to be frustrated, but I don't think it's a conspiracy against the Saints. And look, they're the Saints. I mean, if the NFL had any kind of vendetta against teams, why not pick some other squads to screw over all the time? But yeah, that significantly changed the game. And then to your point, Drew Brees was only 3 of 5 and it was early in the game. And then all of a sudden he's out. You look at him on the sideline, they're taping him up and you think, okay, he bruised his thumb or something. He may be questionable for this game, but get some rest and he'll be back. Then he goes to the locker room and you're thinking, oh, well, x-rays or whatever. It's going to be maybe more serious than we thought. Then he comes back out. It seemed like maybe he had a chance. And I don't know if you saw it, Justin. They showed a brief replay of it, but they tried to tape him up again. And it seemed like he had no opposable strength in that thumb at all, because when he went to pick up a football that was sitting on the bench, it actually fell out of his hand onto the ground. He couldn't hold it. It was like He was a cat, you know. He had no thumb strength at all. I'm concerned about this, Justin, because he's 41 and now he's got ligament damage in his throwing hand. So I don't think this is any small deal. They're saying 6 to 8 weeks. But again, what concerns me is what kind of grip strength does he have? These defensive ends and defensive tackles, they are not shy about trying to rip the ball out of a quarterback's hands. So what kind of grip strength does he have? And then moreover, you mentioned it earlier, his velocity was already dying halfway through last season. Now you're looking at a velocity that might go down more because his grip strength is low. Justin, this could be a really significant point in the season and in the franchise for the New Orleans Saints.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack from this game of what happened. When you want to look at the Brees injury, look, we've talked about this with the Saints even back to last year, that something just was off with this team. They never looked the same. Even in that Rams game, they just kind of pieced things together, but the offense never looked as smooth as it did earlier in the season. And Brees took some big shots. And even from earlier in Brees' career with the shoulder injuries he had, he's never had a rocket arm. He's always just been a cerebral quarterback. He picks his times to take his shots. But thinking back to last year, Eric, think about all the games that he threw deep balls that ended up just looking like lollipops that got knocked down, got picked off. This offense has not looked that great, especially when they're on the road. When they're in the dome, it's like they're just good enough. Just like we saw in week 1 on Monday night, they were just good enough to get by the Texans. And it took a mistake by the Texans that allowed them that field goal opportunity. If the Texans just played normal defense, it would have been much harder for them to get that play that they got the 8 yards and get the timeout and get the field goal.
Right.
So that is definitely got to be a concern with Brees coming back. He's going to have surgery at 6 weeks. What's he going to look like after that? And again, we don't have a lot because we haven't seen quarterbacks into their 40s until now, where you have Brady and you have Brees that have been able to play at a high level, but they've been able to avoid some of these big injuries. Now we're starting to see those mount up where you have Brees, you have Ben, where we're starting to kind of get our first glimpse of what this is going to look like as these guys try to come back, and they're not in their prime. They're not in their late 20s. They're not in their early 30s. They're pushing towards the end of their career. So I think it has to be a concern for the Saints. But I think as a fan, when we talk about what is happening with the refs, I think it's just a string of unfortunate errors that these refs keep screwing stuff up. The call at the end of the game, that's been dissected in terms of the NFC Championship last year. That's been dissected enough that someone should have been able to make that call. Week 1, it was inside 2 minutes. There was no reason why they couldn't have went back, looked at the clock. That play was in review anyways. They had that 10-second runoff that ran it down to 16 seconds. Well, it should have been stopped at 42 seconds. Right. Someone should have been able to catch that. The league has got all these protocols in place to stop this stuff, and yet it continues to happen. So that's absolutely on the refs. And the same way on Sunday in week 2, they should have just let that play out. It wasn't that close to be able to just absolutely blow it dead. I mean, the ball was out of his hand, out of Goff's hand way before it even started to come forward. And then he sort of punched it with a closed hand, which meant it was a fumble. I don't understand why now, after multiple years of replay, the referees still haven't got to a point where they're like, okay, if it's close, let it go, because any turnover, any scoring play, we get the automatic review, and then we don't look bad. We're not the story. Now they're the story, and there was no reason to blow that play dead. So I definitely understand from a fan standpoint why Saints fans and then the players and the organization is so frustrated, because the referees seem to be going out of their way to break protocol, even when the league is involved in terms of New York. When New York is involved and they're going to those replays, they should have someone that can say, hey, the clock actually stopped at 42, not 26 when we initiated the replay. We need to add that time and then do the runoff off of there, not run it all the way down, then do the runoff. Or we need to give Sean Payton a chance at 42 seconds to call his timeout, not at 26. So I definitely understand that, where the league at this point should be telling their refs in Saint games, like, if it's close, for the love of God, just let it play out so we can get past this. Because every time they screw something up with the Saints, it's going to be on national news, Eric. It's going to lead the news segment for that game that week, and it's just going to continue to fester and get worse. And then you start to worry about these referees when they go to New Orleans. At what point does some fan do something stupid out of just sheer frustration?
And to your point, the league actually tells these refs to let it play on. This isn't just us spouting off. They're instructed.
John Perry said it Monday night.
Exactly. To let that play go. Don't blow it dead. See how it develops. And then you always have that replay to fall back on. There's no reason to blow that play dead. So just a complete disaster from the referees. But I agree with you. I think it's a string of bad luck. It's coincidence. And I think we're also looking at it under the microscope, because if you look at the NFL as a whole, all 32 teams, there's bad calls against all 32 teams week in and week out. But the microscope is on this team, and it seems to happen in primetime situations, and it gets blown up a little bit. And like I said, I can understand how they feel that way. And to me, Justin, it's no different than Martin Truex Jr. a couple years ago in NASCAR. It's like he would run great and then have mechanical failures, what seemed like all the time. Obviously not of his own doing. Obviously the crew chief or NASCAR or whoever isn't sneaking into the garage and unleashing these screw job fairies into the pieces of his car so that he breaks down every week. It's just bad luck sometimes. Drew Brees, to your point, is a very smart quarterback. He hasn't always had the velocity of other quarterbacks. If you would give a quarterback like Patrick Mahomes some of these burner receivers that they've had coming through New Orleans, like a Marquise Colston, would look a lot different on offense. But Drew Brees is more of a calculated quarterback, and he's made an entire career out of just being smarter than the defense and being accurate. There's nothing wrong with that. And Justin, I was thinking when you were talking, this would be like if Tom Brady tore his ACL right now and he still has a year and a half left on his contract. He tore his ACL, I think, over a decade ago. And that rehab process happened and he still went on to have a long career. If he tears his ACL now, we're not talking about whether or not Tom Brady can play into his 43, 44, 45 like we are now. I think it's a completely different conversation. And that's what worries me about Drew Brees. Now, flip that over to Teddy Bridgewater. He did look pretty bad in this game, but he has potential. And before that knee injury, he had a lot of potential with the Minnesota Vikings. So I think he's probably one of the better backups in terms of ceiling in the league, but I think his sample size again needs to be a lot bigger. Let's see him after he's had 3 or 4 weeks with the first team snaps in practice and see where we are at that point. But just from the eye test as of bringing him in and what he did, it doesn't look too good for the Saints.
No, he didn't look good at all. And he didn't even have moments. And every time he had a moment, there was a holding call. Every single time they got something going on offense, they got a holding call. Teddy's just not the kind of guy right now. And that's what concerns me the most is you put in Teddy Bridgewater, who they've paid to be a high-end backup quarterback. This offense, as we talked about, not only has Brees sputtered, but this offense has sputtered as well. Outside of Michael Thomas and Alvin Kamara, you start to look at the rest of the team and it's like, okay, Jared Cook kind of does a lot of the same stuff that Michael Thomas does. Michael Thomas is not their downfield guy. He just catches everything over the middle and shorter routes. He's not their burner guy. They're not even really doing a lot of shot plays anymore. So will Teddy be able to open this offense up? I don't know, I guess if he has both his gloves on or doesn't have them on, I don't know how that will affect them. And then also, Eric, they do have Taysom Hill still on this roster. So I'd look for them to use him a lot more, integrate him, especially in their red zone packages, maybe even a little bit more than they would with Drew Brees. But the NFC is loaded up. They've got maybe some breaks because the South doesn't look nearly as daunting as it did. Atlanta is up and down. We're going to talk about the Panthers in segment 2. You never know what you're going to get with the Bucs. They seem to win the games you think they're going to lose and lose the games you think they should be in. So from their divisional standpoint, I think if Teddy can just go, if he can somehow find a way to go 3-3, even 2-4, they'll still have a chance. But if they throw up a 1-5 or don't win any games, they're going to be in big time trouble because you just can't make up that much ground in the NFC. And we don't even know what Brees is going to come back like in 6 weeks.
Right. I was going to say that's assuming he comes back and is any form of his own self. So
right. And if outside of their home games, when they go onto the road, we've seen it's not an easy route for them. They're one of the locks when they're on the road is to just load up on the home team for betting because you always get a pretty good number because Vegas still treats them as though the offense that was running 2 years ago, and so does the public. But when you've watched this team on the road, they're just simply not as good outside of the dome right now. So definitely a couple situations to watch here. We'll keep our eye on. That's going to do it for segment 1. When we come back in segment 2, we have a ton of NFL stories to cover. We're going to talk about Eli Manning. He is now moved to the bench. Is Cam Newton going to be the next Andrew Luck? And who's the biggest 0-2 surprise? We'll have that and more when we come back. All right, we are back. Let's talk about a lot of the other news right now percolating in the NFL, and that takes us to New York, or I guess New Jersey technically, where the MetLife Stadium resides, and Eli Manning, Eric, is out. Daniel Jones is in. We thought maybe this move would happen once Golden Tate was back, once Sterling Shepard had come back, had the rust knocked off from the thumb injury he had throughout training camp. But 0-2, they did not look good in their home opener versus the Buffalo Bills, only were able to put up 14 points in that game. Pat Shurmur decided to make the move and is going with Daniel Jones. So do you agree with the move, Eric, putting Daniel Jones behind this Giants line that is struggling to say the least?
I don't know if it really matters. I mean, I feel bad for him just like I feel bad for Saquon Barkley because he's going to get absolutely wrapped up and destroyed for the rest of the season. But I think if you're the Giants, Eli's not part of this team in any long-term strategy. So at some point, this move has to be made. You're 0-2. You're looking at a division you have no chance in. So I think you might as well do it now. Get as many